6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. 7.6 million pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
Prepare yourself for a world of seriousness. This is seriousness.
What is going on, everybody? Good morning. It is the Science Nights in the Morning, Saturday, and we are all assembled. Dr. Sean Graham, Dr. Anirban Bhattacharjee, and Dr. Thomas Schiller here. We have a very interesting episode for you today. Going to be talking about things that go boom. No, I'm not talking about last week's episode about the atom bomb. I'm talking about the volcano, the most natural boom in the world. And we have a lot of questions. There's a lot of answers on this show, I would assume.
Hopefully.
But there has been a lot of items in the news lately.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago.
You want to update us, Sean?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I was trying to remember where I heard this, and it wasn't even a couple weeks ago. It was 2 days ago, which I guess when this airs, it will be 2 weeks ago. Now I see what you guys were doing. In the St. Vincent in the Caribbean, there's been an eruption. 12 April 2021, it began. La Soufrière. I don't know how to pronounce that. I don't know my French pronunciation, but the La Soufrière volcano erupted in the Caribbean. It's enforcing evacuations. Some officials said that it was like they got caught with their pants down. It's a terrible position to be in.
Yeah.
And so they're evacuating people. They're scared. And, you know, this volcano ain't nothing. Last time it erupted, a major eruption, 1902, killed 1,600 people. So it's not something to joke around about.
So what's the name again?
You're going to make me try to pronounce this again?
Yeah, one more time, yeah.
La Soufrière is my best.
Sounds like Guy Fieri's second cousin. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Continue.
But the island is St. Vincent, and that's down in the Caribbean, like between Martinique and Trinidad, out near Barbados in the Lesser Antilles. And so you guys got nothing to worry about. You can just relax. It'll be fine.
Yeah, but if you're sitting out on the beach with a fruity drink, you might want to.
Or as that person said, with their pants down, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you definitely don't want to be that person.
Yeah, you don't want to be that person.
Well, there have been a lot of catastrophic events happen in our past, thanks to the volcano. We're going to kind of touch on all of them: Mount St. Helens, Krakatoa, maybe, hopefully,
Yeah,
and some more famous events. But you know,
we need to figure out how volcanoes work, right?
how does volcanism actually work? I know diapers.
yeah, that's one way. Yeah,
What is diapers? What are diapers? Are the diapers?
they're not diapers.
Okay.
Although they can be just as deadly.
Okay.
Diapers are just bodies of hot rock or magma that are making their way up to the
Okay.
crust, and they form this kind of plume shape, basically. So, yeah, the question, how do volcanoes happen, is kind of a complex one to answer. It's not just, they go boom and...
So can we say that the Earth is constantly changing?
Well,
We're constantly in a transitory state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right.
and that's the reason we have volcanoes and earthquakes and things like that, is because we have the big tectonic plates that are always shifting around on the surface of the Earth, and where they interact with each other, they cause geologic events like earthquakes and volcanoes.
Right.
In the case of the Caribbean, the volcanoes that occur there are because of what we call a convergent plate boundary, where two tectonic plates are converging, where they're coming together, and one of them is sinking or subducting beneath the other.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of the Caribbean, you have the Caribbean plate that is being subducted by the Atlantic plate. So if you can imagine this kind of on a broader scale, you have two big bodies of rock, two tectonic plates. This can happen between two bodies of oceanic crust, oceanic rock, two bodies of continental crust, or a body of continental and oceanic crust. In the case of the Caribbean, it's two bodies of oceanic crust that are coming together.
Yeah. On a larger scale, the way I think about it is a teenager's face. because that has a lot of different things going on. They're changing, they're moving around, and they get these zits, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of the same?
No.
Oh man, we're completely off.
Only really worked on
Yeah,
that
you're
one.
really working on that. No, so it's unless there's something going on with puberty that I'm not aware of, it's not all that similar.
Yeah.
Although it can be as angry and violent as a pubescent teenager, I guess.
So you have the molten magma, right? And that wants to come up, basically,
Yeah,
right?
heat rises. It's basic
just
physics.
like-
Heat rises, cold sinks.
And the places where the crust is kind of thin, it comes out. What I'm trying to say is you could have basically two ways of this thing coming out. One, you will have like cracks in the crust in itself, and it's like over a big period, a bigger area, and it comes out, oozes out basically.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what happened. Like and we talked about this in one of our episodes. It's happened in the Indian subcontinent with the Deccan Plateaus, right?
Yeah.
Way back.
Yeah, back in the Cretaceous.
Yeah, and then you have these kind of volcanoes, where it's basically a mountain on a kind of like a structure on a place where the crust is thin, and you have cracks, and you have this pressure kind of being concentrated in the small kind of space, and it shoots out.
Yeah.
Right, and that's where like it becomes kind of spectacular.
Yeah, so I guess it's good to start out by defining what a volcano is.
Yeah.
A volcano isn't necessarily a mountain. It's kind of what you described first, Anirban. It could be just a fissure, could be an opening, but it's basically an opening in the earth through which volcanic material erupts. That could be lava, molten rock. That could be fragmental stuff, pyroclasts, pieces of rock that are ejected out of the vent of a volcano. So we have many, many different types of volcanoes.
And I was going to say on that, if you have it inside the ocean, right, deep underneath the ocean, it's hydrothermal vents.
Yeah,
right.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
But the main site of volcanism that we find in the deep ocean are at mid-ocean ridges, and those are right smack dab in the middle of the oceanic crust.
Okay.
And you have points of weaknesses. You have cracks through which lava is being forced, and it's actually driving in part plate tectonics. It's forcing the plates away from each other as it's being pushed up through the crust.
And the same reason is basically what is happening in Yellowstone National Parks too,
That's-
right? And that's why they're so afraid, because the entire area is kind of thin and it can erupt.
That's a different story, and
Yeah.
that's what makes it so complex is the different ways that volcanoes form. The most common way, and like what we see in the Caribbean today, is where you have one of these convergent plate boundaries, where one of the plates is sinking beneath the other. In the case of the Caribbean, and in places like Indonesia, where you have these long chains of volcanic islands, we call them volcanic island arcs, the plate that's sinking is basically pushed down to a great enough depth within the earth, heat increases as you go deeper within the earth, that those once solid rocks, at least in part, can start melting. So they're driven down beneath the crust, and they reach a point where they can start melting, and they form magma. And directly above that point, that magma will sometimes reach the surface, and it generates, in the case of an island arc, a long strip or an arc of volcanoes. The same thing or a similar thing happened here in West Texas, 40-something million years ago. We had the Farallon plate, which is now broken down into several little plates that are still being forced beneath North America. And the Farallon plate was subducting, it was sinking at such a gentle angle that it reached all the way out here to West Texas before it got to the depth at which it would start melting and generating magma. So that's why scientists think we had so many volcanoes out here during that time. It's the same principle. So what's going on now in North America is we have the Cascade Range and the Aleutian Islands up in the northwestern part of the country, where these remnants of what was once the Farallon plate are still sinking beneath North America, and they're generating volcanoes directly above where they're melting deep beneath the surface. So like St. Helens, for example, Mount Rainier, for example, and all the volcanoes that make up the Aleutian Island chain. are all forming this similar fashion. So it can happen like that. Another type of plate boundary that can generate volcanoes is a divergent plate boundary, where instead of colliding, you have plates that are moving away from each other, basically opening up. And what that does is it opens up big cracks in the crust. This can happen in the ocean, or it can happen in the continent. And those cracks form points of weakness through which magma can force its way up and generate volcanoes. This is what we see like in the East African Rift, the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. There's volcanoes around there, and they're formed from a plate boundary.
So what would be more important for a volcano to form? The weakness of the geology in the particular location, or the amount of friction that is happening in that particular location?
It's not necessarily about friction. There are a lot of components that go into whether or not a volcano will form and what type of volcano it will be. Temperature is a big one, and the composition of the rock. So certain minerals take higher temperatures to melt, to destabilize. So you can heat up like iron-bearing minerals up to a really, really high temperature and they still won't melt. Or you can get a mineral like quartz or mica, and they take relatively low temperatures to melt. So it all depends on the composition of the rock, first off. And
let's use Mitre Peak
okay,
as an example. So that was or was not a volcano?
that was a volcano. Yeah.
That was a volcano. Okay. Can you expand on how that formed?
Well, it's this goes back to the Trans-Pecos magmatic province, where what I was talking about, where the Farallon plate was subducting.
Okay. All
so
right.
that was all a
So
part
it's
of that.
part of all that.
Yeah, all the way out to the Shinadi Mountains, and even further west of there into Mexico, all the way out here to the Davis Mountains, to Alpine. That was all driven by the same process, at least we think.
So I was going to then talk about this thing. So we do know that that the what is it called, in going totally to my country, the Indian subcontinent, right? You will have the plates pushing in there also, right? But why don't we see many volcanoes there? But we see earthquakes a lot in that ridge area, but we don't see any kind of volcanic activity.
And that's because the plate boundary you have there in northern India, where India is colliding with Europe, is a continent-to-continent convergent boundary.
Okay.
So in the case of that boundary, you have two big, thick bodies of continental crust, and neither one of them wants to sink or subduct beneath the other one. So what they do is they just basically drive into each other and force up mountains.
Okay.
The highest mountains we have on
Are
Earth
in
today.
in that.
Yeah, so
area.
that's why you get earthquakes,
Yeah.
but you don't get volcanoes.
Okay.
Now, that was a different story,
Yeah, like
65 million years ago when the Deccan traps were erupted.
Yeah, and then you had that's when volcanism happened. I mean, I don't think we had volcanism in the Indian subcontinent after that pretty much period. Yeah.
No, and that was a huge amount of volcanism too.
Yeah.
And we could probably talk. We probably have.
I
we've
think,
done like 100 episodes now. We probably talked about the Deccan traps before.
Yeah.
But so that's another way that you can generate volcanoes. Another volcano that a lot of people, especially in North America, are familiar with is Yellowstone. I think y'all have already mentioned Yellowstone, but that's a special case where you don't have a volcano forming adjacent to a plate boundary or related to a plate boundary. It's just an isolated volcano within the interior of the plate. And what that's caused by is what's called a mantle plume, where you have this body of hot rock that's forcing its way up through the mantle, up to the base of the crust, and it stays there, and it starts melting the base of the crust and generating magma, which ultimately can erupt as lava. And the name, or the specific term we have for like Yellowstone, is what we call a hot spot. It's a hot spot over a mantle plume. So the position of the Yellowstone hot spot has changed over the past 16 million years, but that mantle plume hasn't changed its position. It's another point of evidence that we have for plate tectonics, for the plates moving over time. So it's just an isolated body of magma that occasionally causes volcanism to happen. In the case of Yellowstone, some really massive super eruptions.
Yeah,
And so it happens all at once then. It's not like something that we could, like when you think about Mount St. Helens or Krakatoa or even Pompeii, right? If
Yep.
you want to go back that far. These volcanoes took everybody by surprise.
Yep.
And so would Yellowstone take us all by surprise too? Could it happen instantly?
It could, but when it comes to Yellowstone, it is constantly being monitored. There are seismic stations all over that region, and there are scientists who are constantly watching for significant, what we call earthquake clusters.
And it should be said that the St. Helens eruption didn't take anybody by surprise.
No.
And that was in 1980. Geologists knew that thing was going to go, and they warned everybody, and they got everybody out. Everybody who could be warned was evacuated.
Yeah.
I mean, it
One
was
of the greatest success stories of the USGS and other geologists of the US that we totally called that one. And, a few people died in it, a couple geologists, and then a bunch of people who refused to leave.
Yep.
Right? I ain't going to leave that thing out. I lived here my whole life. Does that sound familiar? I ain't wearing no mask. Them scientists are trying to get my rights, take my rights away.
so. No,
And now their carcasses are in the museum for everybody to see, or at least models.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, bringing it back is that when you have the geologic activity increases, right? What I think people think get frustrated, they cannot predict exactly at what minute it's going to explode, or like what hour it's going to. I don't think that's a frustration with people, but they also, what we don't get, this is a random thing. This is it can happen today, it can happen tomorrow.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it might not happen, but then the geologic activity will slow down.
Yep.
So then people will tell you things have slowed down, you can come back.
Yeah. In the case of Yellowstone, it would take quite a while for things to go back to normal. But I think the current estimate is with the technology we have and the monitoring systems we have, I think it would be like 2 or 3 weeks in advance that we'd know if Yellowstone was going to blow.
That's like a normal. Like
people would have to evacuate a huge radius around the Yellowstone caldera.
But that'd still be so chaotic.
Yeah, that's the kind
even
of
if they gave-
Yellowstone caldera. It's like the area that needs to be evacuated is impossible. Like the effects would be so big. That's what's concerning about that.
Yeah,
one.
and we know that by looking at ancient eruptions related to it. The most recent eruption basically left a blanket of ash across across North America, and the edge of that ash deposit is like maybe 150 miles north of here in Alpine.
Oh wow!
So
and there's areas previous Yellowstone, not actually, but when the hotspot was farther west, like over in Idaho, those eruptions buried some mammals, some prehistoric mammals, like under 12 feet of ash.
Yeah,
it was like Pompeii on steroids.
Yeah, it would be catastrophic.
Yeah,
it would.
But also just to end it all before we go to doom, just because the geologic activity it can increase in Yellowstone, and it doesn't mean it's going to explode. It can just increase a little bit, again slow down. Mm-hmm. So you can do that. There is certain things we
we could talk about that when we come back from the break.
Yeah, and also when we come back from the break, I'd like to talk about more legendary or volcanoes that inspire myth. Mm-hmm. And the realism. I mean, the real stories that happen.
Yeah,
we
can do that
in that occurrence. Okay, we'll see you after the break. All right, everybody, we are back with the Science Nights, and before the break, we're talking about really how volcanoes work, but also some of the legendary volcanoes, and how they kind of crafted our myth and actually elevated our awareness and concern of volcanoes that might happen in the future. Right?
Yeah, and this kind of brings up a topic before we get into the historic eruptions and all that. One thing that I always teach in my intro geology classes is people have this conception of volcanoes as all being these big mountains that erupt, they explode, and spill out all this ash and lava. But in reality, there are a huge variety of volcanoes and types of volcanoes. They aren't all like these mythic explosive eruptions. For example, the like Mauna Loa in Hawaii. If you live near Mauna Loa in Hawaii, you're not going to be in constant fear that it's going to explode and you're going to be buried in ash. The reason is because it's a different type of volcano. It's what's called a shield volcano. And you asked earlier, Conley, about what kind of contributes to how volcanoes form and what type of volcanoes form. Another component to that is the composition of the lava itself. Not all lavas are made the same. The lavas that form big explosive eruptions are more viscous. Viscosity is basically the resistance to flow, a fluid's resistance to flow. So big eruptions like St. Helens, like Krakatoa, those are lavas that are really, really sticky. They're really viscous.
Kind of like if you pour out a thing of Gorilla Glue.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gorilla,
just real thick and real just like... kinda,
high viscosity.
yeah.
Because they can build up more gas, more eruptive potential. But like Mauna Loa, those lavas are really low viscosity lavas because the rock that's being melted to form those lavas is basalt. It's that black rock that makes up the Hawaiian Islands and floors the entire oceanic crust. And when it melts, it usually has a very low viscosity. So instead of exploding, erupting out of a vent, it just kind of, bubbles out, flows out. And the people who live there aren't running for their lives because it's just moving slowly.
These are also volcanoes. That's what I wanted.
Yeah,
these are volcanoes. So it's not always what Hollywood shows, things happening instantaneously, catching us unaware, those things. So we have, these are volcanoes. That's what I wanted to do.
And they're closely monitored too because there are a lot of people who live on the Big Island and there are scientists who monitor them. There are some volcanologists who will put on heat-resistant suits and walk up to the damn vent of the volcano and dip out
the
samples of lava from the vent of the volcano.
Measure the temperatures and all those kind of measures. Yeah, people will do that.
Yeah.
What's the shovel made out of?
Something that's
Titanium?
Titanium.
Yeah.
Wow.
Or
That's pretty
tungsten,
cool.
I assume.
Yeah.
That was a high temperature.
Or it's a-
So what are geysers?
Geysers are they're not volcanoes, but they're vents that hydrothermal
they're
water
vents.
will erupt from, and they're usually related to volcanoes. So like
You're talking about viscosity, and geysers like as viscous as you can.
but that's another component is the amount of gas involved. So even if you have a lower viscosity lava, or in the case of geysers, if you have really low viscosity water,
Sure.
if you build up enough pressure from gas, in the case of geysers, it's water vapor and stuff like that, that can generate enough energy so that it erupts. So Yellowstone is covered in geysers because that body of magma beneath the surface is heating groundwater and forcing it up through all these cracks. The same thing with like the hot springs in Big Bend. It's just happening much deeper, and the water's cooling off a lot more when it gets to the surface.
I see. It has further to travel, I
Yeah,
guess.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why like Old Faithful is there at Yellowstone, because it's being heated by that magma chamber.
Wow.
And this is something if you keep your eye on the news, and whenever Yellowstone comes up on the news, it's always, the same kind of sensationalized media thing where, there have been all these earthquakes in and around Yellowstone and the geysers are more active. And that's totally normal. And it's something the scientists
Wait, you're telling us the media is embellishing something?
I know, it's hard to believe.
Oh, my goodness.
But yeah, we would never do that on the Science Nights.
Never.
So scientists are monitoring these these earthquake clusters, and they happen pretty regularly, but they're not large magnitude earthquakes. They're like one on a magnitude scale or something, but they just happen in really rapid succession because some water is shifting around. There's hydrothermal water that's forcing its way through the cracks. It's not because Yellowstone is going to blow anytime soon. Another thing they monitor is the topography, because like we saw with St. Helens, one of the reasons we knew that St. Helens was going to erupt is because when that lava, or that magma as it is, starts to accumulate beneath the vent of the volcano, it will deform the land surface. In the case of Yellowstone, you have this enormous caldera, and scientists have GIS or GPS stations all over the surface of Yellowstone and the surrounding area, and they can monitor the position of those stations to such a finite degree that they can tell when the ground's kind of swelling up a little bit. So 2 or 3 weeks before the thing's going to blow, they're going to notice that the ground is swelling up, that it's doming up, and it's going to keep doing that. And that's when you're going to get the notice, okay, you've got 2 weeks to get down to Chihuahua or something.
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing is, like I know, right? This is amazing, right? Why would?
But real quick, our listeners might be going, you know what? These guys are totally full of it. They're too much scientists, because they're not. What about these ones that do catch people with their pants down? What was it? Last year, 2 years ago, tourists on a island off of Auckland in New Zealand, a place where there's plenty of scientists. I'm sure they're keeping track of their volcanoes. That thing exploded, killed a dozen tourists without anybody knowing what was going to happen. And then this one in the Caribbean, they can surprise us.
Yeah.
And that's part of their, that's why we study them, of course. And it's also part of their mystique.
Yeah. Yeah. Something like those volcanoes that are really active, something like a pretty good sized earthquake. In the case of St. Helens, it was an earthquake that set off a landslide, which was a rapid event, an unexpected event. So it can catch people by surprise. The real dangerous region is like Indonesia, where they don't have these monitoring, or at least these widespread monitoring protocols, and they can really devastate places, because there are some highly populated islands in Indonesia, and like Anak Krakatau, the son of Krakatoa, is super active, and if it gets to the size of Krakatoa, its father volcano, it could kill a lot of people.
I mean, here's something. I mean, also those places, islands are super densely populated, so evacuation might not even be possible.
No.
Even, let's say you get a week's time, can you really evacuate so many people from different islands there?
No, it would be chaos.
Yeah.
Like Sean described it. And another thing we learned from Krakatoa specifically is, even if you're able to get off the island, pyroclastic flows, one of the more dangerous eruptive results of a volcano, can travel over water. And they can travel uphill too. So getting to high ground, getting out in the water isn't necessarily going to get you out of harm's way.
I mean, that will immediately trigger off a tsunami right there and then, because
big eruption can trigger a tsunami too.
So, and earthquakes can trigger tsunamis too, but volcano explosion can trigger that. And then you have, if you have something a little bit like more explosive than Krakatoa, which in itself in the history of volcanism, I would think it's not very rare. So, and we should talk about the historical volcanoes, right? And I was going to say, Krakatoa in itself, when we have talked about this, brought about very near extinction level events, because you got snow in places which never got snow in their entire life. Food productions and famines were all over the world after that. So just having, as I have kept on saying, if you have like 5 or 6 Krakatoa back to back to back in different places,
it'd be bad news.
Yeah. So
yeah, it was the year without a summer, is what they call it.
And you have that famous painting in Norway where it was painted with the sun up in the sky, but the sun is red completely in Norway, because that's Krakatoa's influence.
Yeah, and that all resulted from the ash.
Ash, yeah.
The pyroclastic material that was erupted up into the atmosphere, and that ash traveled so far and blotted out the sun in so many regions that it devastated crops. It's ash is basically tiny little pieces of glass. So if it gets into your respiratory system, it can mess you up like that. It'll destroy mechanical equipment, electronics. So even a single event like Krakatoa could have really widespread results. And it did, the last
Yeah.
major eruption it had. And, talking about historical eruptions, the reason we talk about Krakatoa so much is not just because it was such a violent eruption, but it's one of the best and earliest firsthand accounts of an eruption that we have, a big eruption like that.
And it was well studied because you had telegraph by that time set up, and we were kind of like, you had electricity and things like that at that point. So that's one
So
thing.
our understanding of volcanic eruptions really jumped forward by observing the results of the Krakatoa eruption. And it's not finished. Krakatoa basically blew apart Sumatra and Java, separated them into two separate land masses, and shortly thereafter, right in the middle of that crater, that caldera that it generated, a tiny little volcano popped up, and it's not so tiny anymore. And that's the Anak Krakatau, the son of Krakatoa. Wow. And it's a very, very present danger to the people of Indonesia. But
Oh wow! Do they sacrifice to it?
no, at least not that
And I
I'm
was
aware
being
of.
facetious, but
Well,
very
it's
convincingly.
in Hawaii they did not human sacrifices, but they would sacrifice corn and stuff to volcanoes. It's not uncommon, but
Interesting.
another interesting piece of history, if you look this up, there are accounts by native peoples. I'm trying to remember what this one account's called, it's called the chieftain's account or something. But it's a written, recorded account of a native person who's describing the eruption of Krakatoa, and it's written in a lay person's understanding, but it's really descriptive. It describes fire erupting from the top of the mountain, and describes the pyroclastic flow and ash, all kind of in simple terms. But it's a really useful piece of history because it's a very, very, very early account of one of the eruptions of Krakatoa.
Wow.
I wish I could remember what it's called. I used it in one of my classes, but maybe we can post it on the
I mean,
Facebook.
talking about history, then we can go to the caldera in the Mediterranean Sea, right? The Santorini Island and all those area, right?
Yeah.
And where you have the Pompeii and the Vesuvius explosion.
Yeah.
They're all related to that caldera, right? If I'm not...
It's all related to what's called the Mediterranean Belt.
Okay.
So most of the volcanoes that occur on Earth occur around what's called the Circum-Pacific Belt, or the Ring of Fire. Who knew that Johnny Cash was a volcano expert?
Yeah.
But in the case of the Mediterranean, you have this isolated region that's affected by volcanoes. It's called the Mediterranean Belt. And a lot of people are familiar with those because of their historical significance.
Because that's where we had them. I mean, if not just that, and it goes all the way to Red Sea area kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. But the earliest account of a major volcanic eruption is Vesuvius.
Vesuvius, yes.
That took out Pompeii and Herculaneum in the Mediterranean. So those are the earliest accounts we have, and that's kind of the... And Conley, I know you were interested in talking about this. The real historical, the folklore, related
the legends.
to the legends.
What took out Atlantis? Right?
Yeah, so that all goes back to the Mediterranean volcanoes. And here's the cool thing. We have this ancient pantheon of Roman and Greek gods. Well, let's break down the two major terms that we use when talking about igneous rocks.
Right.
We have volcanic rocks that form from volcanoes. We have plutonic rocks, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that form intrusions. Yeah. So we've got Vulcan, the god of fire, and Pluto, the god of the underworld. So there's a very clear connection between the pantheon of Greek and Roman gods and volcanic eruptions, right? If you see a friggin' mountain exploding and erupting lava and ash, and you don't know why it's happening, where did they go? They went to their
Underworld
their god.
and fire.
Yeah.
Yep.
And those are the roots of our modern pantheon of gods, our modern religions. So it might have all originated from volcanoes, these unbelievable natural occurrences that people couldn't explain.
Yeah.
And at
this,
random times.
yeah, at random times. So,
I mean, I was going to say it's not just that. You would also have the explosion on Crete and where the Minoan civilization, if I'm not Minoan civilization, Minoans, they got wiped out because of those stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the things they were talking about, and so one of the explosions on the I don't know which mountain is there exploded, and they say that's what happened. You have the volcanic activity that gets the ash out and everything, right? And that's what is in the parting of the Red Seas. Before the parting of the Red Seas, he gives Moses brings on like some plague in Egypt, right?
Yeah.
And this and stuff. So that if your ash comes in, then you kind of wiped out the entire thing. And then the volcanic, they say what happens is as Moses was going, and it turns out very interestingly when we say the parting of the Red Sea. So, but if you do the actual Hebrew translation, it is parting of the Sea of Reeds. So it's a swampy thing they're talking about.
Yeah.
They're not really talking about like a Red Sea. So it's there in that Hebrew translations, and that is well known. It's not like I am doing something controversial here.
Yeah.
It's actual literal translation.
Yeah, the translation.
Yeah. So what happens is they're saying then after the volcano happens, some kind of like a earthquake or a tsunami happens, and that kind of creates like a rifts and stuff like that and they create this pathway.
Yeah.
And then it gets blocked out later out.
Yeah, that's something I've never heard about. But the Red Sea truly at one point was parted by geologic forces.
Yeah.
And it's a divergent plate boundary. It's what we call a rift basin. If you look at a map of East Africa, you have the Red Sea, which branches off kind of to the northwest, and then you have the Gulf of Aden that branches off almost like 45 degrees from that.
And then you have Persian Gulf on the other side kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So you have these two open bodies of water that formed from rifts from the continent pulling apart. And this is kind of a common geometry that we see in these kind of rifts where you have three separate big rift basins, or actually two rift basins form, and one failed arm of that rift that we call an allocogen. But in any case, when you take the brittle, rigid crust and you start pulling it apart, it's going to fracture and it's going to fault. And that forms points of weakness that magma can come up and form volcanoes. So that's why there are volcanoes there. So those biblical stories could be related to
geologic activity,
active geologic, processes.
Oh, wow. How do you explain the golems? All right. Anyway, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. And afterwards, we're going to kind of wrap up the whole volcano story in talking about what we expect and how the process of actually learning from the past in order to predict the future. How's that?
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. All right, everybody. We are back with the Science Nights in the morning. We have been talking about the history of volcanism, how it works, but now we're going to talk about not only the history of it and how it works, but also how we use that information to predict the future and even advance our technology. So, Thomas, can you talk a little bit about the tools that we use? Like, what are we doing? What kind of evolutionary kind of leaps are we making in technology in order to help us predict what's going on here?
So the technology really isn't that complex or state of the art. Mostly what we use are seismic stations. So the kind of technology that goes into a seismograph is slightly different.
It's simple. You're just measuring vibrations.
Yeah, you're measuring vibrations in the earth, and you have a instrument that detects those vibrations and then records it.
Yeah.
I don't know, Anirban, you could probably comment on this, but when we think of seismographs, we think of the spooling seismogram that has a needle bouncing
Yeah,
on
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Do they still use that, or is it some kind of?
I mean, there has to be a charting, but I don't think the paper thing happens anymore. Just like you don't, when people think about, oh, I'm observing, meaning I'm going out to the telescope, putting my eyepiece and standing in the cold. That doesn't happen anymore. You can pretty much sit in a comfortable room and control it with the computer.
Yeah.
Here, everything goes into a computer. You're not going to, because it's not sensitive enough. And when Conley was talking about the advancements, so where we are making it, we are trying to make it really sensitive, and so that we can pick up that the slightest vibration that is going to come, because deeper it is, right? The vibration as it comes up to the surface is going to lose power. So the deepest ones are going to create the smallest vibration. So we want to do that. Understand where is it kind of like, is it small vibration? Or is it like a deep vibration coming in? So you want to see that. So that's where the major thing is. And if you can figure out the deeper vibrations are increasing, the number of frequencies there is increasing, so then you know the geologic activity is.
I need you to come into my physical geology class and lecture when I talk about that sort of thing.
What we are doing is not actually changing a whole lot of new science. What we are trying to get is we are making these instruments better. Right? You're getting better and better instruments to get the data. And that leads to better science.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that. So
where the real precision and technological advancements come in when it comes to monitoring earthquakes are in satellites and GPS.
Oh, okay.
Because, we think of GPS as what we've got on our phone or our little GPS unit that's accurate down to, a few inches or a foot or two. The GPS that they use to monitor earthquakes and volcanoes is so accurate that if the ground surface shifts just a tiny bit, they'll be able to detect that through satellites, the change in position. We can do this with plate tectonics too. We can monitor the change in position of static points on the Earth and determine what direction the plates are moving. So that's really where the technology is. And Yellowstone is a great example of that. And this is something you can monitor yourself. I think way back when the pandemic started, we might have talked about this when we talked about science things you can do at home. But the USGS has a website that you can go to, and you can monitor actively earthquakes and volcanoes.
And report on them and add to the data.
Well,
right?
No, people don't report on this because the scientists are constantly monitoring it.
Oh.
It's just a public interface where the public can go and actually see these earthquake clusters that are being hyped up on the news. They can see which volcanoes are being monitored. There are volcano warnings. If you look at the Aleutian Islands, which is super active, that's where you start seeing like red alerts for volcanoes about to erupt. Luckily, there's no one really living out there. So, and you can monitor Rainier, St. Helens, all these places that are still active volcanoes that aren't a real present danger. And you can monitor Yellowstone. You can zoom into Yellowstone, and it'll show you the intensity, the magnitude of earthquakes that are happening in real time. It'll show you the surface monitoring stations, how they're moving. So it's a really cool resource. Not if you're super terrified of a volcano erupting, but if you're interested in kind of seeing the same sort of data that a seismologist, a scientist is looking at, you can go and check it out and watch it in real time.
It's fun.
Yeah,
that's great.
And these seismometers also, like we have send them to Mars and Moon, right, in order to study the stuff there. Like this is the same thing. We are studying seismic activities in Moon and Mars. So these, it's not just we are using this for something just for on Earth. And another thing I would like to point out is when people are saying, okay, that's the human thing, but not every human thing, like they would like to monetize it, right? The monetization comes in, insurance companies want to know.
Yeah, exactly.
They want to know because if they want to, because they want to figure out when they want to stop giving you insurance. Because if the volcano is going to happen in the prediction is within like 4 weeks, and you want to buy a house like 2 weeks before
or
it's gonna
your
happen. Yeah.
insurance rate. Yeah.
Yeah, your insurance.
Yeah,
is
there
quite-
really is a
yeah.
practical
So-
application to it, especially with earthquakes.
Yeah.
With any kind of geologic hazard, like the West Coast, California,
I mean-
people who build their houses on unstable sediments on the coast. It's like, man, their insurance must be through the roof.
And,
Yeah.
and also like these technologies, right? These vibrations, right, allows us to build skyscrapers in places like Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
Like this allows us, like, to if you don't know how to challenges and how much it can happen, and then you build big houses
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah, and it's not necessarily rooted, or its origins aren't in that sort of practical purpose, but it all goes back to trying to mitigate and trying to monitor these major geologic hazards like volcanoes, because we want to know when they're going to happen, and we want to be able to at least tell well enough advance that some people
for
can
sure.
get away.
And you know what? The world is transitory, much like a teenager's face.
and I was
and
Give it up.
no,
Con.
give it up, Collie. Not happening.
USGS.gov is the website you can go to, and you can actually see the Mars 2020 mission geology. You can also look at earthquake early warnings in Oregon and Washington. You can get a map of the Southern Pacific Ocean earthquakes. And there's also an article on here about the invasive zebra mussels found in pet stores.
Sweet.
Yeah. The US
Throwing that out there.
The USGS and the USGS website is one of the number one resources that we have here in the U.S. You can go on the website, and just those few things that you listed off, Conley, you can do that. But also on the USGS website, you can get just about any topographic map, a lot of geologic maps that have been published over the past 100 years.
Yeah.
It's really incredible, an incredible resource.
Wow.
Yeah, and topographic maps helps for if you are like serious hiker and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and you want to study the land and stuff.
Yeah, or if you just want to
Yeah.
go casually out and do some geologic mapping,
Yeah.
map
I
out some
love
structures.
those maps. I love
Yeah.
them. You can download them in their publication quality, so you can actually, if you can find a printer, you can have them
Those
printed
big
out.
printers, you have to
Yeah.
get them
Yeah.
printed
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you cure hair loss by looking at that enough? Topographic maps.
Conley's just trying to make comparisons to
Some
heads and
random
faces.
everything. I'm
yeah.
trying to bring it back to teenagers.
Like,
here.
I mean, yeah. You also try to say volcanoes are the reason we have rock golems, so which is I didn't
Yeah.
really understand.
You never asked about Atlantis,
Yeah,
though.
yeah, Atlantis.
I wanted to really. You know what? Hey, we have a little bit of time.
We
left.
have a little bit of time. Okay, so
Okay, what wiped out Atlantis? Because I know Plato got the story from an Egyptian
yeah.
and passed it along about Atlantis.
So nobody. First of all, you want to say, did Atlantis really even exist? So is that?
Yeah,
we
and there
know
were
that it did
there
exist?
were mermaid people and everything.
Yeah.
No, one of the legends as to how Atlantis disappeared was not that it was swallowed by the ocean, but that it was destroyed by a volcano, which
Yeah.
to me seems more realistic, especially considering the region. And there's an actual volcano, Mount Thera, which they think is the culprit. That if there was an Atlantis, that it was basically covered by pyroclastic material and disappeared under that. Which it's totally possible. Whether or not it was some like technologically advanced, civilization, probably not. But like if we look at Pompeii and Herculaneum, it took years for archaeologists to excavate those cities out of the ash because they were overtaken by just these enormous pyroclastic flows.
Yeah.
That's why you have those mummies, those ash mummies where people are frozen
Sure,
in,
yeah.
in terror, where they're grasping their
Their
loved
child,
ones,
yeah.
because they were overtaken so quickly, and it buried them under feet of
I
several
mean,
feet
this
of
is
ash.
the original nuclear explosion, the mushroom cloud and everything. I mean, this is basically the process are different. The science is different, how the energy comes out. What I'm trying to say is, like, if you want to see what kind of effect like a nuclear explosion can happen, like Pompeii, and like that's instant. It's instantaneous.
Yeah,
This
and
death
they
is
they
instantaneous.
did not know what to do either.
Yeah.
The journey to the center of the Earth, Iceland has so many volcanoes because it's another divergent plate boundary. It's the mid-Atlantic ridge cuts straight through Iceland. So, yeah, there's some more recent fiction there than Journey to the Center of the Earth.
But I think Journey to the Center of the Earth pretty much is the most famous one.
Yeah.
Right. Like anybody knows.
That's a glorious book.
Yeah.
Every 8-year-old should read that book.
Yes, I agree.
And every 40-year-old should read it again.
Okay.
All right. Anything we want to wrap up with so I can actually like stitch this together into a show?
Why don't we say good luck to the people of St. Vincent, and
Yes.
hope for the best for them. Hope everything works out, and that they can get home and get through it safely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. Good luck, everybody in St. Vincent and Otterbon. That is in the where is it?
It's close to Barbados or
Yeah, in the Caribbean.
Caribbean.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, good luck to them. We'll see y'all next week on Science Nights in the Morning. Thanks for listening to this episode of Science Nights in the Morning. Be sure and follow us on Patreon for exclusive gear and uncut episodes. Check out the latest science articles on our Facebook page and subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast listening app. You can also listen every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time at BigBenRadio.com. And if you got a question, we'll join the discussion. Hit the hotline at 432-217-1983 and record your message. We couldn't do this without you, and thank you so much for listening each and every week. That's Science Nights in the Morning with a K, and we'll see you next time.